Hello, my name is Chris. This is Networks and Data Security video number 17. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as possible. And I always say that, and it always takes 10 minutes anyway. So in this video, we're going to cover, firstly, appropriate planning to ensure that users don't share remote desktop connection information, the importance of tracking software license use, and the impact of non-compliance and failed audits. So when planning your remote desktop access topography, there are a few things to keep in mind when it comes to the security of that remote connection information. Now, most times when a user connects to a server remotely, there's a few different things that take place here. One is the authentication. They're going to sign in with a username and password. And two, a license is issued to that user at the time that they sign in. This is called a client access license, or CAL. Now, depending on how you have the system set up, whether it's going to be tying into their Active Directory or not, you could have them simply enter a password, which is called one-time password or OTP, or you could set up something like a two-factor authentication. Two-factor meaning that there's two different ways that they're authenticated before it allows them access. I set that stuff up for Steam, and I'm kind of glad because there's some mean people out there. All right, so in two-factor authentication, when you first sign in with your username and password, it's going to then send a message to your cell phone or email. But typically it's set up by default to go to your cell phone. So you get a text message on your cell phone that has an access code, and the website or the remote desktop program client, rather, that you're using to sign in is going to be waiting and expecting this code. Once you've received the message, you type that code in, it authenticates you as the legitimate user, and off you go. Now, when planning your remote connection system, the first thing you should do once you're starting to look at licenses and authentication types is get a list of the users that are expected to make use of the system. Having a list of the users that are expected will tell you how many licenses you're going to need for starters, but may also help you, depending on the size of this list, may also help you decide which authentication type is most appropriate. Now, whichever authentication you ultimately choose, there's two different kinds of licenses that you can build your system on. There's per device and per user. Now, per user is the more slack of the two choices. In per user, the licensing isn't enforced. There's almost no tracking whatsoever on who's using which or from where. These kinds of CALs are assigned to a user in Active Directory. They're tracked but not enforced by the licensing server. They can't be tracked within a workgroup. You can't revoke any of these types of CALs. Temporary licenses are not available. Now, the one major risk of this kind of licensing is that these kinds of CALs can be overallocated. So this would effectively put you in breach of the remote desktop licensing agreement. And I don't hear good things about that. Now, the second kind of licensing is per device. These kinds of licenses are attached to each device specifically. They are tracked and enforced by the license server. They can be tracked regardless of Active Directory membership. And unlike per user, with per device, you can recall or revoke up to 20% of these licenses. Temporary licenses are issued to the devices the first time that they connect, and these licenses are good for 52 to 89 days. These kinds of CALs cannot be overallocated. So not only is this a little more secure from the user distribution side of things, but it's also one less liability for the company itself. Now, the main benefit and importance of tracking software license usage is in mitigating the volume of software piracy and the potential cost of wasted software. You may not be using it illegally, but if a quarter of your licenses are going unused, you're effectively wasting money. By most reports and accounts, audits of your security and licensing should be done at least once a year. And it's best to do a local audit before the vendor arrives to do one of their own. And they will come. Now, when you buy this kind of software, you're not actually purchasing the software in the sense that you then own it. You're buying your right to the access and usage of this software, which is why disregarding the terms in the agreement can lead to some hefty fines. And penalties can be in the ballpark of $100,000 per non-compliant license. More often than not, once one vendor shows up, audits, and you fail, more vendors are likely to follow in quickly, making use of unlicensed software or Having licenses that are operating outside of the agreement is effectively copyright infringement. So it's important for you to monitor and track who's using what license and how many instances of them, the different devices that those licenses are being used for, and potentially the licenses that are going unused. The biggest driving point behind this being compliance. But as is the trend with these topics and subjects, awareness is the key here. So when you're going to be maintaining or planning this sort of system, you should understand the risks involved and the complexities of the planning, which is entirely dependent on your projected deployment and base of users. But as with any other plan, things are subject to change. The most important thing here is to just CYA, cover your ass. If yours is covered, you're probably covering that of the one above you. Maybe. And nobody cares about the next one if they just care about themselves. Stop looking at me like that. It's true.